Welcome to the Scarlet Report. So in this video, we are going to shed some light on the Dan Ashworth story. Now, traditionally on this channel, I try to avoid these kind of topics, mainly because, I just don't like talking about things that I don't know much about. And of course, with these internal conflict type of situations, it's really hard to discern between what is true and what is not. However, on the other hand, I also do have a subscription to The Athletic, a sports publication that I think for the most part know what they are talking about. They have very good sources, and for the most part, they have more hits than misses. So in this video, we're gonna look at the facts behind this Dan Ashworth story. Without any further ado, let's analyze. All right, so the article starts by briefly talking about how Dan Ashworth lost his job, mainly after the game against Nottingham Forest. He was asked to go meet Omar Barada, the CEO, in his office, who of course told him that his services are no longer needed. Of course, the article goes on to talk about the difficulties that Ashworth met working with Ratcliffe and within Ratcliffe's organization, but also the fact that he's highly sought after and that maybe Arsenal might be looking to recruit a new sporting director as a replacement for Edu, and then Dan Ashworth could be that guy. So far, nothing really interesting. However, now we reach the actual meat and potatoes of the article that help us quite understand this Dan Ashworth situation. So basically what it says that the signs of disharmony were detectable at the very moment that Ashworth would have been expected to prove his worth. In searching for a replacement for Erik ten Hag as manager, Ratcliffe wanted to hear ideas from the man he had sanctioned spending around £2.5 million to bring in from Newcastle. So this is actually quite telling, because when Erik ten Hag got fired, and actually there is evidence that Ashworth was actually involved in the decision that kept Erik ten Hag as manager, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. But when Manchester United made the decision to let Erik ten Hag go, Ratcliffe came in and just asked Dan Ashworth, the director of football, it's his job to actually recruit new managers, and asked him, all right, so then who are we going to bring in as an Erik ten Hag replacement? However, Ashworth, that is his claim, did not actually provide any clear, compelling arguments for who to bring in. But guys, this is the sad reality. I mean, when you are in these kind of positions, these top management administrative positions, these executive positions in any organization, really, you are paid the big bucks to make the big decisions that bring the big bucks to the shareholders. This is just the reality of it all. And for someone like Ratcliffe, who's just invested $1.2 billion into a club, he's spending a lot of money hiring these people, so he expects some results. Now, of course, here it sounds like I am on Ratcliffe's side, but no. But it's just there are two sides to this argument. So let's take it one step at a time. Of course, there was a list that Ashworth provided with the following theme, which is Premier League experience. And suggestions included the likes of Eddie Howe, despite the picture not always being rosy at Newcastle United, Marco Silva, Thomas Frank, and of course, Graham Potter on an interim basis. Now here, besides the Premier League experience theme, there's also another theme, which is that two of these managers, Eddie Howe and Potter, are managers that Dan Ashworth knows. But also Marco Silva and Thomas Frank. What this looks to me, and we're going to see this pattern repeat itself throughout the article, is that these two managers, in my opinion, they could clearly be successors to Eddie Howe at Newcastle United. I mean, none of them are Manchester United level yet. Out of these two, probably Thomas Frank is the most interesting pick over here. However, with Thomas Frank, I do have an issue on whether his achievements at Brentford, and he clearly is doing well at Brentford, are due to him and his ability as a manager, or is it that Brentford Moneyball philosophy that they are built around that just makes Brentford a club that is built for the kind of success that Thomas Frank has shown? We have to remember that certain clubs like Brighton, for example, even though Graham Potter has been successful, De Zerbi has been just successful, and the current manager is also just as successful. In other words, Graham Potter and De Zerbi are not missed at Brighton. So again, their success, is it because of their ability as managers, or is it because of the structure they work in? But of course, none of these names are exciting. And of course, Ratcliffe agrees with that feeling, in that Ratcliffe wanted more decisiveness and a dynamic appointment, someone with a certain charisma. By the way, the word charisma is going to repeat itself in this article again, who was capable of shouldering the enormous responsibility and scrutiny that comes with leading one of the world's biggest clubs. Okay, so obviously a manager with charisma. And one thing that I did not really pay attention to when it happened is this, that it seems no coincidence that after being quoted on Ten Hag's contract extension and every signing brought in during the summer, there was nothing from Ashworth on the official announcement of Ruben Amorim's appointment. It's something that you can easily miss. And honestly, I did miss it. I did not add 1 and 2 together. But when Erik Ten Hag's contract was extended, Dan Ashworth made a public statement. After every sign-in, he made a statement. But when Amorim was appointed, he didn't. And the reason for that is because Ashworth was said to have had little input on selecting Amorim as United's new head coach, with Barada a major influence on the Portuguese getting the job. And this is where I have to talk a little bit about Omar Barada. As you guys probably know, Omar Barada is Moroccan, just like me. So for a long time, we've been following his career. We are definitely proud to have one of our countrymen, being involved in such high level of, within the football hierarchy. So I've been really following what he was doing with Manchester City, even though I'm a Manchester United fan. And actually, Barada was part of the team that was building that succession plan in Manchester City for the day where eventually Pep Guardiola would leave. And at the top of that list, in the top 3 option, was Ruben Amorim. So I'm not actually surprised with Barada actually stepping in and being like, you know what, Dan Ashworth, those options, none of them work. I'm going with a guy that I know very well and a guy who fits the bill for the next Manchester United manager or the next Manchester United head coach, Ruben Amorim. And so he is Barada's appointment, not Dan Ashworth's appointment. This is why there was no official announcement from Dan Ashworth when Ruben Amorim was appointed. And of course, Barada took charge of the face-to-face negotiations with Sporting Club Portugal president himself. But this has more to do with respect. I think the relationship that we have with Sporting is amazing since we signed Cristiano Ronaldo in 2003. And so out of respect, if their president is negotiating the release of their manager, then it has to be done with our counterpart, which was of course our CEO Omar Barada. Okay. Also, what's interesting is that Ratcliffe actually met Amorim the week before, as United were in Istanbul. We were in Istanbul when we were facing Fenerbahce. Okay. Interesting. That's when Erik Ten Hag used Nosair Mazraoui as a number 10. What was he thinking? What was that? But of course, the results of that game didn't really matter. And the game after, a lot of people blame Erik Ten Hag getting fired on Diogo Dalot, missing that open goal opportunity. And what if we had won that game? Maybe Erik Ten Hag would still be Manchester United manager today. But actually, this doesn't matter as much because, as you can see, Ratcliffe was already meeting Amorim in Istanbul. And of course, before they meet, there would have been preparation for probably at least a couple of weeks prior to that. But of course, Ratcliffe met Amorim and he really liked his charisma. And I think that it's true that one of the best attributes of Amorim right now is his charisma. For example, the way he handles the media, the Manchester United fans, for the most part, including me, we're very happy with what he's saying in front of the cameras, the way he's handling that pressure and that, being under the spotlight as a Manchester United manager is great. But Ratcliffe, of course, felt that Ashworth should have been much more assertive in targeting a new head coach and should have looked beyond those people he already knew. And that's very, very important because we are not just bringing in a director of football to just bring in the people he worked with, because then the pool of talents that we can target, both in terms of head coaches and in terms of players, would be extremely narrow, and that's not what Ratcliffe wants. Now here, there's just a little bit of more details about Ashworth taking in holidays. That's not really important, but this is actually the key point in this article as far as I'm concerned, because friction was also apparent when Ashworth proposed bringing in a data company to evaluate the candidates to replace Erik Ten Hag. Now, this is insane what happened here, because to me, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Because Ratcliffe's reaction to that was obviously he reacted badly, and then he countered that it was Ashworth's job to know such matters rather than outsource it. Basically, in other words, I am paying you the big bucks. I've waited for you for 5 months so you can make this kind of decisions. That means when I ask you who should be the next Manchester United manager, then you should be the one provided the answers, not outsourcing this to a third party. But from Ashworth's perspective, I can also get it. Because, guys, a lot of people are asking, some people ask me, even people in real life, my friends, they say, well, how do you explain the fact that, like I said earlier, a team like Brighton, They get it right every time they recruit a manager, but also with their players. They sell players for high fees, and they replace them with players that you wouldn't know unless you are playing the Pentagon challenge on Football Manager. You know, that's how hidden those gems are. Why? Because of data analysis. They do have a robust data analytics department, which Manchester United doesn't have. How can Liverpool get it right with the Jurgen Klopp replacement and bring in Arne Slot, who is, in my opinion, doing even better than the best days of Jurgen Klopp? Again, data analytics. And we don't have that in Manchester United. In fact, actually, Ratcliffe agreed, because in one of his interviews with United We Stand, which is the official Manchester United fanzine, he said that data analysis comes alongside recruitment. That means they go hand in hand. There is no great recruitment strategies, successful, effective recruitment strategies without a successful and effective data analysis infrastructure. It doesn't really exist here. We are still in the last century on data analysis. This is the owner of Manchester United speaking. So he definitely understands the importance of data and why it helps with key recruitment. So here, the fact that he doesn't get what Ashworth is saying, to me, just shows that Ratcliffe himself does not really know what he wants. And maybe here there must be a little bit of an ego at play. But still, the key thing here is that I'm spending all of this money to hire you as the football expert. So why are you outsourcing the key decisions to a third party? But this was not the only reason that actually got Ratcliffe to be quite angry at Dan Ashworth and quite disappointed and dissatisfied with his contribution at Manchester United. There was also this chapter right here where Ashworth oversaw all summer signings, which included some influence from Erik ten Hag. Now, this is really interesting because actually Dan Ashworth was for keeping Erik ten Hag at the helm. And in fact, yes, I think here there is a little bit about it. Where both Dan Ashworth and Barada both deny being involved in Ten Hag staying and extending terms after United's FA Cup final victory, but they were across the decision according to sources. That means they were involved. The reason why they denied is simply because it's sensitive information, since both of them were in gardening leave. But of course, both were in communication on United business before they were officially in the building. That means both of them were actually involved in keeping Erik ten Hag. And in fact, further down in a few paragraphs, it actually says that the reason why they were for keeping Erik ten Hag in the summer is because they felt that the club was changing so many members of the staff in behind the scenes that it was maybe important to keep a point of continuity. And that point would be Erik ten Hag. And of course, they got it a little bit wrong, but I think that Dan Ashworth got it even more wrong, because not only did he keep Erik ten Hag when Ratcliffe clearly wanted him gone. In fact, we all remember how he coldly greeted him, after winning that FA Cup final. So Ashworth not only kept Erik ten Hag, but also all of his summer signings, including some influence from Erik ten Hag, basically carrying on the tradition of that Erik ten Hag, John Murtho kind of relationship, where Erik ten Hag has a big say in who we sign. In fact, Ashworth was tasked with making things work with Ten Hag and sanctioning the signing of Nocer Mazraoui and Matthijs de Ligt, two preferences for the manager, among the spend of 200 million. I'm not really complaining about Nocer Mazraoui, but de Ligt probably could have done a little bit better. But here is another reason why I think Dan Ashworth may have lost the trust of Ratcliffe. For example, here, Joshua Zirkzee, who moved to United in the summer from Serie A side Bologna, was seen as more of a club-led transfer. He had been on Newcastle's list of potential transfers at the start of the year. Just as I said with the likes of Marco Silva and Thomas Frank, how to me they seem like managers who probably Dan Ashworth was keeping an eye on when he was at Newcastle as potential Eddie Howe successors. Zirkzee was scouted for Newcastle. He was scouted according to the Newcastle needs. When you look at the Newcastle front line, especially with a player like Alexander Isak, who is more of a fast player who likes to play in behind the lines, a player like Joshua Zirkzee makes sense for them. They don't have a player who can hold up the ball, a link-up player. But maybe at Manchester United, I mean, I like Zirkzee, but probably there are a few similarities between him and Højlund. Maybe we could have been better had we bought more of a nimble dribbler, for example. Someone in the mold of prime Alexis Sanchez or Aguero or Dybala or Lautaro Martinez, for example. So a player in that mold, not those names, but a player similar in style than someone like Zirkzee. What this tells me is that Dan Ashworth, because he doesn't have access to robust data analysis infrastructure at Manchester United, he just relies on what he knows when it comes to managers, but also players. He went with Xerxes because that's a player he knew from his time at Newcastle. He had a complete dossier on Xerxes, but maybe he didn't stop to think whether Xerxes would actually be the right purchase for a club like Manchester United to meet Manchester United's needs. So overall, this situation right here between Dan Ashworth and Ratcliffe is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. It is a classic case of a difference between reality and expectations. All right, so this story has quickly spiraled out of hand, and it's a classic case of misunderstanding. A classic case of reality not meeting expectations. It's a classic case of Ratcliffe expecting a different Dan Ashworth than the Dan Ashworth that he's gotten. And to me, the prime culprit in here is Ratcliffe, not because of the way that he's reacted. Of course, if he feels that Dan Ashworth is not the right man, then he's entitled to fire him, okay? That's not the problem. The problem is that Ratcliffe did not do his homework in properly vetting Dan Ashworth and Dan Ashworth's capabilities. And for someone like Dan Ashworth to be effective, he needs a strong data analytics department. And Manchester United, according to Ratcliffe himself, doesn't have it. So why not bring someone like Dan Ashworth with the mission and the key objective of building the club's data analytics? And so it could be a case of let's focus on building our data analytics department in the short term so that we are able to make better decisions in the future rather than just bringing in Dan Ashworth and just expecting him to just like ChatGPT to just know exactly what it is that you need. Because Dan Ashworth and directors of football in general, they're not encyclopedia. They're not a search engine that just knows everything there is to know about football. But there are people who can analyze the data and analyze other qualitative data that's available to them, and then make decisions. And then for the most part, those decisions are successful, and that's what gives a director of football their worth. But how can you expect a director of football to work effectively without data? So the only thing that Dan Ashworth could have done is to actually just fall back on what he knew from his previous jobs. And that, of course, what is good for Brighton, what is good for Newcastle, what is good for the English FA is not good enough for Manchester United. For us to take the next step, to have that quantum leap into the future, we need strong data analytics. We need data-driven decision-making. And that's where, in my opinion, Ratcliffe got it wrong. But it's fine. I mean, your best teacher is the mistakes that you make. So I really hope that Ineos just learn from this mistake and that the next man we appoint in this position is definitely the right guy. And he is provided with the right tools to succeed. Now, guys, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it the thumbs up and leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Until next time, cheers.